In a quiet classroom, a young girl proudly shared about her father, an elite Green Beret serving his country. But the principal scoffed openly, her voice laced with disbelief. No one from your background could possibly have a father like that. The words hung heavy in the air, and she didn't stop there. Furious, she grabbed the girl by the collar and landed a sharp slap across her face, right in front of the entire stunned class. Silence fell. The girl's cheek burned. The principal's triumphant smirk said it all. She thought she had won. Then, without warning, the door burst open. A towering figure in full-dress uniform stepped inside, medals catching the light with every move. The sheer authority in his presence froze the room. When his gaze fixed on the principal, something shifted in the air. You could feel it. Justice wasn't just coming. It was already here. You won't believe how fast everything unraveled next. Stay until the very end to witness her total downfall. In the comments, would you have spoken up for the girl in that moment? Type yes if you would, no if you're not sure. Let's hear your voice.
At 16, Aria Washington wore her smile like soft armor, a silent defiance wrapped in politeness. She carried it through the halls of St. Jude, even when it earned her nothing but blank stares or the occasional smirk curling off designer lips. In group photos, she was always the dot on the edge, the girl no one invited to the center. But today, her eyes flickered with something rare: pride. Her father, General Darius Washington, was coming home, and for once she let the warmth of that truth fill her chest. During career day, the guidance counselor, a plump man with a pasted-on grin and the faint odor of day-old coffee, asked students to name their role models. The room buzzed with rehearsed answers: lawyers, surgeons, hedge fund heirs, future Ivy Leaguers. Then Aria's voice cut through the drone, clear and unflinching. "My father is a Green Beret. He taught me that courage matters more than what's on your sleeve." The room collapsed into silence, sharp and suffocating. A few students blinked. One stifled a laugh. Others exchanged glances like they'd just heard her claim her dad was a time traveler. And then, click, the unmistakable rhythm of heels slicing down the corridor like a countdown. Enter Dr. Lorraine Ashford, the headmistress forged from frost and fire, swathed in a suit so bold it felt like a challenge. Her lanyard swung like a noose around her neck, gleaming with the 3 sacred letters she weaponized daily: Ph.D. She paused in the doorway, her gaze zeroing in on Aria like a hawk finding prey. A hush fell. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. "A Green Beret, is it?" Her voice rang out, brittle and mocking. "How inspiring! American royalty right here in our humble halls." The class tittered nervously, the scent of blood in the air. Dr. Ashford swept in, her perfume sharp and synthetic, her smile a blade. She locked eyes with Aria, except it wasn't a gaze, it was a challenge, a slow dissection. "Miss Washington, remind me, where did you say you live?" Aria's jaw tensed. "Kennedy Street, ma'am." A flicker of disdain lit Ashford's eyes. "Ah, yes, the South End. I do love the imagination that blossoms in underserved neighborhoods." She turned to the class, her voice sugar-drenched and laced with venom. "In my experience, those from such areas often invent grand stories to mask the absence of real legacy." She tapped her Ph.D. badge like a scepter. "Unlike some, I don't have to fabricate prestige. I earned all 3 of my doctoral degrees from institutions that matter." The insult landed like a slap, leaving Aria exposed in a sea of stares. Some students smirked, relieved the spotlight wasn't on them. Others watched with thinly veiled disgust, too cowardly to speak. Ashford's smile sharpened. "Tell us, Miss Washington, what exactly does a Green Beret do all day in the city's poorest block?" Aria's voice strained but held. He trains soldiers. He serves his country. Ashford didn't let her finish. Enough fairy tales. Stolen valor is a federal crime, you know. She let the accusation hang, loud enough for students in the hallway to hear. There is nothing more pathetic than claiming a legacy that isn't yours. It disgraces the real heroes. But then, perhaps I expect too much. Arya sat frozen, fury and humiliation twisting beneath her skin. She had been called poor, token, even liar, but this public gutting of her father's honor was something else. Ashford wasn't just humiliating her, she was branding her. The head mistress circled once more, then issued the verdict. You will write a full statement admitting you lied to this class about your father. Submit it to my office by 3 p.m. If you refuse, the school board and the local Veterans Association will hear about it. We do not tolerate frauds. And with that, she turned on her heel, her laughter echoing down the hallway like a spell cast to ensure no one would dare defend the girl from Kennedy Street. The room shifted uncomfortably. The bell shrieked to release them, but Arya didn't move. She stared at the blank sheet in front of her, the confession she'd never write. What she couldn't know then was that this was only the first cut. The school, the whispers, Dr. Ashford's long shadow, they were just getting started. By lunchtime, the smear campaign was complete. Her claim was a new joke in every hallway, the Green Beret lie, a girl from the projects pretending her father was a hero. It was funny if you had no soul. Gossip spread like gasoline fire. St. Jude didn't need proof. It had legacy, and legacy always won. The cafeteria buzzed with cutlery and curated cruelty. Sneakers squeaked across the floor. Laughter burst and died each time Arya passed. She moved like a ghost trying to remember how to be human. But even ghosts weren't mocked this way. The old order had smelled blood, and they weren't letting go. Not until her dignity lay beside the broken pieces of her father's name. But what they didn't know, what Dr. Ashford never understood, was that Arya Washington wasn't born to kneel. She was forged to rise.
She moved like someone trying to melt into the walls, shoulders tight, breath shallow, tray shaking in her hands. But no one disappears in a school like St. Jude, not when the predators already smell weakness. At the far end of the cafeteria, the legacy trio waited like royalty seated on thrones of cafeteria chairs. Landon Hare led the pack, his golden hair perfectly sculpted, a Rolex glinting under the fluorescence like a weapon. Beside him sat Bryce Mercer and Reed Holloway, heirs to oil, law, and real estate empires. They weren't just students, they were untouchable, woven into the school's DNA like mold behind wallpaper. Dr. Ashford once called them young men of promise. Everyone else called them what they really were, kings of the underbelly. Arya spotted them too late. Landon stepped into a path, his grin carved from ice. "Well, well," he said loudly, pausing for maximum attention. "If it isn't our little war hero." Tables nearby went still. Forks halted midair. "Tell me, did your dad parachute in from the projects today?" A ripple of laughter followed, knives dressed as giggles. Bryce snorted. "Maybe she's here to recruit us for the special forces." Reed leaned in, grinning. "What you think, Sarge?" Arya gripped her tray tighter, knuckles whitening, eyes fixed on the floor. She didn't answer. She just kept walking, until Landon slapped the tray from her hands. Time slowed. Food sprayed across the floor like a crime scene. Mashed potatoes smeared her sneakers. Apple slices bounced like coins. The laughter that followed wasn't laughter. It was a feeding frenzy. Arya stood frozen, face burning, but she didn't cry. Not yet. She dropped to her knees, trembling as she gathered the mess. Bryce crouched low beside her, his voice a whisper full of poison. "This is just lunch. Wait till Jim." A teacher glanced from the doorway, saw everything, and turned away.
Nothing at St. Jude moved unless Dr. Ashford gave permission. Then Landon knelt beside her, like a predator playing nice before the final bite. You pissed off the principal, Washington. Bad move. With theatrical cruelty, he dumped the rest of his juice onto the mess she was cleaning. "Clean that up, soldier." Her hands stilled in the puddle of cafeteria filth, sleeves soaked, shame crawling up her arms like frostbite. Around her, conversation resumed like nothing had happened. The world moved on, because it always did when the blood wasn't theirs. She stood, fists clenched, heart pounding like a war drum. But Landon wasn't finished. He leaned in close, breath foul with smugness. "You know what Ashford told us? Said your daddy isn't even in the army. Says he's locked up for dealing crack." He chuckled, eyes gleaming. "That green beret? Probably something your mom picked up at a flea market." It wasn't just cruelty now. It was sanctioned propaganda. Rumor with a doctorate. Dr. Ashford's fingerprints were all over it. Arya's chest heaved, her throat tight with rage. She bit down on her lip, hard enough to bleed, trying to swallow the scream clawing its way out. But the tears came anyway, hot, silent, and unforgiving. Landon snarled at the sight of them. "Don't bother crying," he sneered. "You started this with your lie. Now you pay." That's when her voice broke loose, stronger than she expected, trembling but defiant. "My father is a Green Beret," she said, loud and clear. "You can say whatever you want. It won't change the truth. He's a better man than any of you will ever be." Silence dropped like a hammer. The cafeteria held its breath. Landon blinked, stunned by the flame suddenly igniting in her eyes. He spat on the floor, but his swagger cracked for just a second. And then the full weight of Dr. Ashford's directive returned, settling on his spine. This wasn't just bullying, it was an assignment. He had been sent to break her. Bryce scoffed. "Sure, Arya, maybe next time you'll say your mom's an astronaut, too." Arya stared them down, wiping her tears with her sleeve. Her voice was steadier now, like steel cooling into a blade. "My dad's coming home, and when he does, everyone who laughed, everyone who disrespected his name will regret it." The trio laughed again, but this time it felt off, unsure. The edges had dulled. Around them, students looked away, pretending to be absorbed in their phones. Teachers nowhere to be seen. Arya stood in the chaos, food at her feet, dignity battered but still standing. The pain was carved into her like a scar, but something in her gaze refused to die. Elsewhere, in a corner office, drenched in polished mahogany and hollow awards, Lorraine Ashford lounged like a spider in silk. Her voice oozed through the phone like honey over glass. "Yes, Mrs. Hale, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Landon is such a promising young man, truly." She smiled as she glanced at the framed renovation fund pledge signed by Senator Whittaker Hale himself. "Of course I'll handle everything. You know how these girls can be, emotional, dramatic." She hung up slowly, savoring the moment like a rare vintage. Then, alone, she allowed herself a quiet laugh, not the kind you share, but the kind you savor when power works exactly as planned. To her, every broken girl was a stepping stone, every shattered spirit another trophy. In her world, humiliation wasn't unfortunate, it was strategy. And Arya Washington, she was just the next name to be crossed off the path to legacy.
She didn't know it yet, but the daughter of a Green Beret was about to start a war. Not with fists, with truth and fury. The next morning, Arya Washington walked the halls of St. Jude like someone carrying a live wire. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the electric pressure of what she had decided. Inside her backpack, nestled between old notebooks and a cracked phone charger, was the one thing that still carried her father's scent, a bronze star. Dull from age, edges softened by time and honor, it had rested on his chest, and once on hers, in a tiny apartment during one of those brief golden leaves. Last night she polished it until her hands hurt, the echo of Landon Hale's cruelty ringing in her ears with every stroke. Her mission was simple:
reclaim her father's name, or burn the lies trying. By second period, she stood in front of the Hall of Legacy, St. Jude's sacred shrine to lineage, privilege, and manufactured glory. The scent of lemon polish clung to the air, but beneath it, Arya could smell the rot. Decades of silence dressed up in framed newspaper clippings and fake smiles. She stepped forward, gripping the metal like a blade, knuckles ghost white. Legacy kids wandered in, eyes flickering between the glass-encased accomplishments of families like the Hales and the McAllisters, and her, always her. She stopped at the display titled Distinguished Bloodlines, an altar of white faces, each one smug, preserved in fake bronze and cold glass. Then she spoke, voice trembling but steel-willed. "My father earned this," she said, raising the medal above her head. "He fought for this country. You don't get to laugh at that, not here." For a moment the room held its breath, but Landon, ever hungry for spectacle, stepped in like a snake drawn to heat. "Let's see it then," he smirked, voice smooth with venom. "Plastic, or maybe straight out of Chinatown?" Before Arya could react, Bryce Mercer and Reed Holloway flanked her, their grins wide and empty. Landon plucked the medal from her fingers with a flick. He dangled it by the ribbon, eyes narrowing at the engraving. "For valor. How original. Next year they'll hand these out with juice boxes and nap time." Bryce tossed it in the air. Reed caught it with a mocking salute, making shooting noises as he mimed pulling a trigger. They passed the medal between them like a toy, laughing louder each time it flew. Arya reached out, voice rising in desperation. "Give it back! You don't understand what that means." They didn't stop. They never would. Landon wound up for a final dramatic toss, and then it happened. His finger slipped. The medal spun through the air like a scream, crashed into the corner of a trophy case, and clattered to the marble floor. The ribbon tore, the solder split, and just like that, the last piece of her father's pride shattered in the school that worshipped fake legacies. Gasps filled the room, and then silence. Arya staggered forward, everything inside her unraveling. The world tilted, cold and cruel, and that's when the devil walked in. Dr. Lorraine Ashford's heel struck the floor like a death march. She took in the scene with practiced calculation, then zeroed in on the broken metal lying like a corpse on the tile. Arya dropped to her knees, reaching for it, but Ashford got there first. Without a word, she tapped the fractured bronze with the tip of her patent heel, sending it skittering across the floor until it clanged into a nearby trash bin. She didn't look at Arya. She didn't need to. "Don't bring trash into my legacy hall, Miss Washington. This room is for real achievement." The laughter that followed was soft and poisonous. Landon smirked. Reed nudged Rice. They turned to leave, done with her, as if she'd never mattered, as if her father's blood was disposable. Arya knelt there, frozen, staring after them. Then, trembling, she scrambled to the trash can. Her hands plunged through discarded napkins, food wrappers, bits of shame left behind by kids who would never understand service or sacrifice. Her fingers closed around the broken metal. She held it to her chest, rocking slightly, the roar in her ears louder than any laughter. Her mind screamed for a way out, but there was none, only memory. Her father kneeling beside her in the living room back in Columbus, tucking the medal into her pajama top. "This is yours now, baby. Keep it safe while I'm gone. It's for Turridge, yours and mine." That moment, that warmth had once made her feel invincible, but now it felt like a lie. She had tried and failed. They had destroyed something sacred, and she had let them. Her breath came in short, broken gasps. She wanted to scream, wanted to tear down every glass case in that hall, but all she could do was cry. Silent, furious tears that left streaks down her cheeks as she clutched the pieces of her father's honor. Shaking, she fumbled for her phone. Her thumb hovered, then dialed. It rang. Once, twice, straight to voicemail. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry. I tried." The silence on the other end crushed her more than Ashford or those boys ever could. She sat there in the wreckage of the lie they called Legacy Hall, and for a moment the world didn't move. But elsewhere, power stirred. At the heart of St. Jude, Dr. Ashford's office sat like a throne room, cold, calculated, and cruel. Every wall screamed triumph, polished wood, pristine certificates, awards that glittered with false virtue. The air itself seemed to bow. But today, something had shifted. The room felt tight, coiled, electric with tension, as if even the walls knew a storm was coming, a storm in the shape of a girl who refused to be broken.
Aria Washington was marched into the heart of the storm like a prisoner on trial. The marble floor beneath her shoes seemed colder today. The air thinner, heavier, like the building itself conspired against her. Dr. Lorraine Ashford sat behind her monolithic desk, the blinds drawn just enough to keep sunlight out, but not the shadows. Her smile was a razor's edge, thin and cruel. Aria's eyes flicked to the single sheet of paper on the desk, an expulsion form. She didn't need to ask. "Sit," Ashford commanded, voice clipped. Aria obeyed, spine straight as steel, but inside her chest, her heartbeat pounded like war drums. A manila folder slid across the table with 2 manicured fingers. "Locker inspection," Ashford said blandly. "Routine, of course, ahead of Parent Week." She flipped it open. Inside lay a school-issued answer key for the chemistry final, official letterhead, watermark, and all. A neon post-it note clung to the corner like a leech. On it, Aria's name, written in perfect cursive. "Miss Washington," Ashford began, her voice syrupy with insincerity, "I was hoping we wouldn't have to resort to this." She pushed the expulsion form forward with a pen that looked like it belonged in a courtroom. "But this is beyond disappointing. Would you care to explain how stolen property found its way into your locker?" Aria didn't flinch. "You tell me," she shot back. "I don't even know the code to that locker. The janitor reset it last week after the handle snapped off." Ashford's eyes narrowed, cold flint behind a mask of decorum. Excuses. Always the excuses. She leaned forward, her voice lowering to a hiss. "Sign the form. Admit you cheated. Do that, and this disappears quietly. Refuse, and I call the authorities. Handcuffs, headlines, and goodbye to your future." Aria reached for the pen, not to sign, to push it back with a single tap of defiance. "My father taught me never to surrender to bullies. Not on the battlefield, not in school, not ever." The mask slipped. Ashford's nostrils flared. "I suppose your precious father also taught you to defy authority, to spit in the face of discipline?" Her voice was shaking now, venom curling beneath each syllable. "Let me explain something, Miss Washington. My word is law in this school." Aria leaned in, matching her tone. "Your word is rot, Dr. Ashford. You poison everything you touch. You turn students into weapons. You'd rather ruin a child's life than let your porcelain image crack." Ashford recoiled as if slapped, but the rage boiled back almost instantly. "You have no idea who you're talking to. I built this place from dust. I made it the pride of this state." Aria didn't blink. "You built a museum of lies. You protect predators. You bury truth under donations and legacy plaques. You can take away my credits, my diploma, my future, but you will never take my father's honor, and you sure as hell won't take mine." The desk rattled as Ashford's hand slammed down hard enough to startle even the teachers in the hallway. "You think your little sob story, your cheap metal, your working-class daddy's street smarts? None of that matters here. You are nothing." She grabbed a pre-filled school discipline slip, slamming it on the desk like a verdict. Last chance. Aria didn't blink. No deal. That was when Ashford lost it. She rounded the desk like a predator unleashed, her grip iron around Aria's arm. "Let's see how brave you are when they all watch you fall." The hallway was ice, dead quiet, lockers gleaming like steel coffins. Doors cracked open, curious eyes peeked out, students held their breath. Aria walked tall, even as Ashford's nails bit into her skin. Whispers followed them. Fear, speculation, maybe, just maybe, a flicker of sympathy. They neared the largest classroom. Ashford's voice dipped to a growl.
Your military fairy tale ends today. This school will remember you as the liar who got caught, not the girl with a hero dad." Arya's lips curled into a smirk. "And you, they'll remember you as the woman who went too far." Ashford yanked the door open. It slammed against the wall with a sound like a gunshot. Silence devoured the room. Teachers froze. Students stared. Some sat mid-laugh, their expressions choking into confusion. Ashford didn't waste a second. With a shove, she hurled Arya forward. She stumbled, her knees crashing onto the tile, folders scattering like leaves in a storm. The laughter came slow, then swelled, nervous, mocking, a spectacle to devour. "Stand up," Ashford barked. Arya rose slowly, palms red, eyes burning. She met the room's gaze. No one moved. No one dared. "This," Ashford spat, pacing before the chalkboard like a judge before a firing squad, "is what happens to liars, to thieves. This is what happens when you disrespect the sanctity of St. Jude." Arya's voice cracked through the noise. "My father is not a thief." Ashford wheeled on her. "He's a what? A hero?" Her hand exploded across Arya's cheek. A sharp slicing sound cut through the stunned silence. Arya's head snapped to the side. The room gasped. Someone dropped a pencil. It clattered like a bomb. No one moved. No one breathed. Arya swayed, lips trembling, the red print of Ashford's hand already rising on her cheek. And still, she didn't cry.
Area Washington's face burned, a red, rising welt where Dr. Lorraine Ashford's fingers had cracked against her cheek. Her vision shimmered like heat waves off pavement, but she forced herself upright, blood buzzing in her ears. Across from her, Ashford stood panting, her manicured mask cracking into raw fury. "You dare talk back to me?" she hissed, voice warped by venom. "After everything you've done, the shame you've brought to your class, your teachers, your so-called legacy?" Arya opened her mouth, but before she could form a word, Landon Hale and Reed Holloway were suddenly at her sides, hands clamping down on her wrists like chains. Bryce Mercer blocked her legs, his bulk pinning her in place. There had been no verbal order, but the signal was crystal clear. Dr. Ashford had granted permission. Violence authorized. "Let her go," a girl's voice whispered from the far corner, but it was paper-thin, swallowed by fear and fluorescent light. Ashford leaned down, her face only inches from Arya's. "You want to be a hero?" she snarled, lips trembling with hatred. "Let me teach you your place." With a vicious tug, she yanked Arya upright by the collar, dragging her like a puppet into full view of the class. Her eyes still burned with defiance, but the tears clung to her lashes, refusing to fall. Ashford's hand came down again, harder, more desperate. The slap knocked stars across Arya's vision. She bit her tongue to keep from crying out. Blood welled in her mouth, warm and metallic, but she swallowed it. She would not give them her pain. Not today. Landon's sneer curved sharp. "Still proud of your Green Beret daddy now, Arya?" She turned her head and spat blood onto the linoleum. "My father's more honorable than any of you will ever be." Ashford's face twisted. "You filthy, lying little—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The Legacy boys pulled her arms behind her back, holding her up like a trophy, forcing her to face the class like a criminal on display. Some students cried openly now. Others clutched their phones, filming with trembling fingers, too stunned to intervene, too terrified to speak. Dr. Ashford raised her hand again. "Let me show you what happens to liars in my school. Let me show you your place, you bastard child." The slap that followed was savage. Arya's head snapped sideways, her cheek inflamed and already swelling, a bruise darkening like a storm cloud. The silence that followed wasn't passive, it was suffocating. No giggles now, no mocking whispers, only the dead weight of breathing, of dread, of something ancient and rotten breaking free from the polished floors of St. Jude.
Ashford's voice cracked, her words no longer commands, but desperate assertions of power she could feel slipping. You think your soldier fairy tales mean anything here? I am the law. I decide who stays, who leaves. Arya raised her chin, voice low but unshakable. You're not the law. You're just a coward in pearls, and now everyone knows it. Ashford stumbled back as if slapped herself, hand twitching, suspended mid-air between pride and panic. Then the door exploded. It didn't creak, it didn't open, it detonated. The wooden frame slammed back so hard it bounced off the wall, a thunderclap that split the classroom in two. Gasps, chairs scraped, phones dropped. The Legacy trio froze, their hands still locked around Arya's arms like statues caught in the moment before judgment. Dr. Ashford turned slowly, her face drained of color, her mouth forming a silent question. The air snapped tight like a drumskin, and then came the footsteps, heavy, controlled, final. A single man filled the doorway, broad, unshakable, draped in dark green military uniform like a monolith carved from discipline. 4 silver stars gleamed coldly on his shoulders. His face, severe and unflinching, held the weight of someone who'd stared down war and won. A faint scar curled along the edge of his right eye, just enough to make you wonder what he'd survived to earn it. General Darius Washington didn't speak. He didn't need to. Behind him, 2 military police officers flanked the entrance, their hands resting close to their holstered sidearms, eyes masked in unreadable calm. Time fractured. Students held their breath. Teachers looked like they wanted to vanish. Even Landon, Reed, and Bryce stood locked in place, still gripping Arya's arms, but no longer sure why. Dr. Ashford's knees bent slightly, the subconscious motion of a woman realizing she was no longer the most powerful presence in the room. The general's eyes scanned every inch of the classroom, cataloging each bruise on her daughter's face, each student's frozen gaze, each adult's cowardly posture. His expression never changed, but the silence roared louder than any accusation. And Arya? She stopped shaking. She looked at her father, her eyes swollen, her cheek flaming red, her arms still pinned, but her spirit unbroken. And in that moment, as the weight of uniform and truth entered the room, it wasn't just justice that arrived, it was reckoning.
He stepped inside, each boot fall against the linoleum ringing out like the first toll of Judgment Day. His voice came just once, low, thunder-wrapped, and absolute. Release. Landon Hale and Reed Holloway let go like they'd touched a live wire, stumbling backward in a daze, their faces collapsing into raw fear. The spell had broken. Bryce Mercer hesitated, then followed, retreating without a word. Arya Washington nearly collapsed from the sudden lack of restraint, but General Darius Washington reached her in 2 strides. His hands, those same steady hands that once taught her how to ride a bike, that had saluted the fallen, that had survived the weight of battlefield loss, caught her shoulders and held her up. She didn't need to look. She knew it was him. He tilted her chin upward, and in her bruised, tear-streaked face he saw everything. The pain they'd tried to bury her in, the fury they'd tried to shame her for, and the fire they hadn't been able to put out. "Dad," she whispered, and the sound cracked the world open. For a flicker of time, Arya was no longer the accused, the bruised, the humiliated. She was a daughter, wrapped in the presence of an unshakable force, the shadow of a man who had stared down enemies foreign and domestic and never blinked. General Washington wiped her tears with his thumb, his voice barely above a whisper, but ironclad. "I got your call, sweetheart. I'm here now." The room had stilled, students locked in place like statues carved from guilt and awe. Some dropped their phones without realizing it. Some pressed their backs to the wall, eyes wide, breaths shallow.
For most, it was shame. For a few, it was reverence. But for Dr. Lorraine Ashford, the architect of this cruelty, it was something far more dangerous: dread. She tried to speak, to regain a semblance of control, smoothing her hair with shaking fingers. "This is an academic matter," she said, too quickly. The words collapsed on contact. General Washington turned, his stare a surgical blade. "Lorraine," he said, each syllable cutting deeper than the last. "We meet again. Didn't expect me here, did you?" Her mouth opened, then shut. Her authority, once towering, now wilted like cheap stage curtains in a storm. You're just some soldier," she managed to stammer, but the insult had no weight behind it. "I am General Darius Washington," each word slow and lethal, "commander of the Eastern Division of the United States Army. I lead 50,000 men and women who trust me with their lives." He took a step closer. "And you," he continued, voice dipping into something glacial, "just struck the daughter of a senior officer in front of witnesses." He didn't need to raise his voice. Every inch of that classroom was already vibrating with tension, ready to shatter. The lights above seemed to flicker under the weight of it. No one moved, not a whisper, not a cough. Even the teachers, once silent co-conspirators in their inaction, now looked like they might faint. One clutched a clipboard so hard it cracked. Another looked down, tears already forming. Arya stood taller now, her father's presence pouring strength back into her spine. She didn't flinch, didn't hide. She let them all see her, bruised, bloodied, but unbroken. And behind her, the full weight of justice, power, and truth had finally arrived, not as a system, but as a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The confrontation had only just begun, but already Dr. Lorraine Ashford's empire of fear had begun to crumble, and the students, they were no longer afraid of Arya. They were afraid of what would happen next.
Dr. Lorraine Ashford's carefully constructed facade cracked, recognition flickering through the panic in her eyes. This isn't... You have no jurisdiction," she stammered, but the words fell lifeless. General Washington didn't waste breath on rebuttal. He turned to the two MPs beside him, his command forged by decades of battlefield clarity. "Secure the exits. No one leaves this building until local and federal authorities arrive. This is now an active investigation into the assault of a minor and the violation of military family rights." The soldiers moved instantly, boots echoing against tile, radio sputtering alive with coded chatter. Somewhere down the corridor, a siren blared, and the school's emergency lights pulsed crimson, bathing the windows like the final warning of a dying empire. The students gasped, whispered, shifting uneasily. "That's Arya's dad. He's a general? Are we in trouble?" Fear warped into awe, then into realization. Everything had changed. General Washington wrapped his arm around Arya, pulling her close, her body trembling but upright. Then he turned back to Ashford, the heat of judgment radiating from every breath. "When you looked at my daughter, you saw a threat to your illusion of control," he said, voice carved from stone. "When I look at her, I see every mile of dirt and fire I walked through to give her a place in this country, and I will burn down anyone who tries to take that from her." The room fell into a tomb silence. Even the hum of the emergency lights seemed to quiet. Ashford staggered back a step, her once loyal bullies now shifting with unease, their allegiance dissolving into survival instinct. General Washington's eyes fixed on them like crosshairs. "You'll all answer for what you did, each of you." He knelt beside Arya, brushed the hair from her battered face, and whispered, "You did nothing wrong. You never have to fight alone again." She broke then, not from weakness, but from the sudden, overwhelming relief of not having to carry the war on her shoulders alone. Tears spilled, and the dam finally cracked.
Around them, the school locked down. MPs closed the main doors. Outside, squad cars flooded the front lot. Sirens wailed louder, red and blue flashing across frosted windows. Justice had arrived. Not polite, not bureaucratic, but righteous and armed. But beneath the surface of that moment, old ghosts were stirring. The war between Darius Washington and Lorraine Ashford did not start today, and it would not end here. As the sun sank outside, the light that bled through the windows of Ashford's office painted the walls in blood-orange streaks. But the warmth did not reach inside. The room, once her sanctuary of self-worship, had been seized. General Washington stood behind her desk, arms folded, the gold trim of his uniform glowing like edges of firelight. The military police flanked the door like statues of justice, with heartbeat and breath. Ashford adjusted her blazer, her fingers twitching. Her degrees shimmered on the walls, but now they looked like tombstones. Washington spoke first, voice low, razor sharp. "It's been a long time, Lorraine." She stiffened at the sound of her first name. "You don't belong here. This is my school. He raised a hand. She fell silent. "This stopped being your school the moment you laid a hand on my daughter." Her jaw clenched. "I remember you, the golden boy who threw away an Ivy League future for mud and gunfire. You could have been anything, but you chose violence." Washington stepped forward, unblinking. "I chose to protect children in war zones so they could live long enough to sit in classrooms like this. I bled for a flag you treat like a decoration." She laughed bitterly. "So American, a man with a gun thinking he can fix the world. Here, it's about education, not war." He leaned over her desk until her chair creaked under the pressure. "You parade your degrees like weapons. You built this school on fear. Fear of failure. Fear of not being born in the right zip code. Fear of not being enough. You crushed every student who didn't conform to your script. Tell me, how's that working out for you now?" She tried to retort, but his presence eclipsed her. He didn't need to shout. The weight of his truth did the work. "You remember what you told me at graduation? Someday the world will kneel to the letters after my name. I said I'd rather die standing for others than live on my knees for a diploma. Looks like we both got what we wanted." Ashford's voice cracked. "You think you're noble? You ruined your daughter's life. She'll forever be marked a liar and a fraud." He nodded his head. "No, Lorraine, that's what you tried to make her. What you tried to make every child who didn't fit into your empire of mediocrity." He paused. "But children see through masks, and yours just cracked." Her composure exploded. She slammed her fist onto the desk. "I have 3 doctorates. I am the elite. You're just a thug in a uniform." Washington didn't even blink. "You used degrees to push people down. I used my weapon to lift them up. That's the difference between a fraud and a protector." He opened the folder in his hand and slid it across the desk. "Preliminary report, evidence of misconduct, power abuse, grant theft, financial fraud. Your bronze statue, paid with funds meant to help veterans' kids." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "Military legal team is inbound. You'll face federal and civilian charges, and no paper on your wall will save you." Ashford looked to the MPs as if expecting sympathy. None came. Her shoulders slumped. You can't do this." Her reply cut through her like ice. "I have every right, as a father, as a soldier, as a citizen who fought for people like you to hide behind paper shields and never know fear." Silence bloomed, heavy and final. Then, "You built a tower on sand, Lorraine. It was always going to fall." He turned at the door. The court will call soon. Enjoy the solitude you worshipped. And he was gone. But the reckoning was just beginning. The storm detonated through St. Jude like a charge wired to every lie. Within hours, military auditors descended, sharp suits, cold eyes, badges gleaming. General Washington moved with gravity, doors opening without a word. Staff went pale. Students turned silent. In the accounting office, papers flew. The school's pristine ledgers revealed their rot. Stolen scholarships, false allocations, bribes buried in renovation budgets. A locked drawer yielded the truth. The Future Heroes Fund for military children had been drained to fund Ashford's throne. Custom furniture, spa-grade staff perks, and a self-commissioned bronze statue in the school courtyard. General Washington's jaw clenched. The truth wasn't just ugly, it was treason wrapped in academia. And it was time the whole country saw it.
Just stole from the children who needed it most. General Darius Washington's voice was a low growl, edged with heartbreak. Just then, a young black student hesitantly entered the room, clutching a torn envelope. "Sir, I was supposed to get money for textbooks. They said the fund ran out." Washington nodded, his jaw tightening as he accepted the letter, fury simmering behind his eyes. The room stiffened. Red lights pulsed through the windows. Silence pressed like a weight. Then Dr. Lorraine Ashford was led in, flanked by 2 military police officers. Her signature smirk clung to her face, but now it looked artificial, like makeup smeared across a cracking mask. Washington didn't offer her a greeting, just a sharp gesture toward the mountain of evidence on the table. "Sit." She obeyed, fingers clenched so tightly her knuckles paled. He began, slow and sharp like a scalpel before an autopsy. "The numbers don't lie, Lorraine. You funneled federal scholarship funds into vanity projects, espresso bars, leather chairs, imported stone tiling. You stole dreams and repackaged them into luxury. You drank lattes while kids dropped out because they couldn't afford notebooks." She tried to speak. "All expenditures were board approved," a slap echoed, not on her face, but the sharp crack of bank statements hitting the table. "Approved or forged," Washington snarled. "These checks bear your signature. These shell contracts list your name, not the board's. You didn't just spend illegally. You laundered public trust through lies." One of the auditors muttered under her breath. Another just looked away, ashamed they hadn't noticed sooner. The head accountant buried her face in her palms. Ashford's voice cracked. "You don't understand what it takes to build a legacy." Washington leaned forward, voice booming, relentless. "A real legacy is built on sacrifice, not theft. On truth, not manipulation. You built a tower of success out of broken promises, and I'm tearing it down brick by brick." He flipped open a folder. "These names, Elijah Fields, Gavin Rhodes, dozens of students from military families and marginalized backgrounds, were all denied funds. Their futures were rerouted, not by fate, by you." Her face blanched, her hands trembled. Washington didn't stop. "You didn't just bully Aria. You robbed an entire generation of their dignity. You decorated your office with their stolen ambitions." A whisper passed between the auditors. The room froze. One finally answered Washington's question. "Over $3 million. Gone." He turned back to Ashford. "That's not mismanagement. That's erasure. That's the murder of potential." His voice dropped to a growl. "And it ends now." He pulled out his phone. "Governor Reese Stanton, please. This is General Washington. I'm invoking federal oversight. I have the evidence in hand. I'm formally requesting an immediate suspension of St. Jude Academy's charter and the launch of a joint federal-state criminal investigation. Yes, send the press. They'll want to see this." Ashford lunged with her last defense. "If you do this, you'll ruin the school's reputation." He turned on her, eyes blazing. "A reputation built on stolen hope doesn't deserve to survive.
You built a temple to yourself. Now you'll answer for every brick. Students and parents gathered in the corridor, their whispers swelling into stunned realization. This place belongs to you, announced Washington to them, voice like thunder. Not to her ego, not to her corruption. The future is yours again. Ashford's lips parted like she might protest again, but no sound came. There were no saviors left for her, no donors to call, no fancy titles to hide behind. The MPs took her arms, leading her out past rows of furious eyes and stunned silence. Washington stood at the window, staring out at the bronze statue in the courtyard. Her statue. He didn't need to say it. Soon it would fall. But this was just the beginning. The call to war had gone out. Emergency summons reached every elite household tied to St. Jude's dark money. The parents of the legacy trio, Bryce Mercer, Reed Holloway, and Landon Hale, were told their presence at the emergency board meeting was mandatory, not requested, required, the kind of language usually reserved for subpoenas. But arrogance dies hard. These were people who thought problems could be solved with a country club brunch, a silent donation, or a center on speed dial. By twilight, the school's grand hall glittered with jewelry and ego. Designer heels clicked across marble floors. Luxury sedans idled outside. Mrs. Celeste Hale arrived draped in pearls, her voice laced with contempt. Dragging us from our homes over some detention drama. She passed off her keys to a valet, not noticing the military Humvees parked in the shadows. Inside, the legacy boys sat like criminals awaiting sentencing. Their parents didn't sense the change yet. They still thought this was a school on the defensive. They hadn't realized yet. It was a battlefield, and they were already standing on the losing side. The board chair began with a weak welcome, but the words died mid-sentence. General Washington stepped onto the stage. His uniform gleamed beneath the lights. His silence held more authority than any speech. The room recoiled with collective recognition. The ribbons, the rank, the living embodiment of consequence. Landon Hale's father, Senator Whitaker Hale, inhaled sharply. The reckoning had arrived, and this time, no amount of money or legacy would protect them from what was about to be revealed.
Shame twisted into desperation, sour and frantic. Landon Hale's pulse thundered in his ears. He couldn't go down for this. Not alone. Not like this. The door opened with a slow creak, and a JAG officer stepped inside. Sharp uniform, unreadable eyes. "Landon Hale," he said, calmly but with force that cut through the air. "You're scared, that's clear, but understand something right now. Truth can either set you free or be the stone that sinks you. You want leniency? Then talk, now." Landon hesitated. Bryce Mercer shot him a glare like a knife. All silent threat. But Reed Holloway just stared blankly at the floor, lips pale, hands trembling. Seconds stretched into agony. Then Landon finally broke. "It wasn't just us," he said, voice cracking open like a dam. "Dr. Lorraine Ashford told us to do it. All of it. The bullying, the videos." The shame slammed into a mid-sentence. "She said we'd be expelled if we didn't get proof, if we didn't make Aria look like a liar. She wanted to humiliate her. She made us record it, every time." The officer leaned forward, voice tight. "Be specific. Who recorded what? Who gave the orders?" Landon blinked rapidly, guilt crawling across his face. "All of us did. Sometimes she'd text us what to say. She wanted video proof, said she'd play it for the school board if she needed leverage against Aria's father. Most of the time, she just kept him for herself. She made us send her every clip," he continued, his voice sinking to a whisper. "She'd watch them in her office, sometimes during those wine parties with her friends. They'd laugh." The officer's pen paused. Beside him, Bryce's mask crumbled. "I didn't want to," he muttered. "She said my parents would lose their donations if I didn't help. I didn't know it would get this far. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Reed finally spoke, a ghost of a whisper. "She called Aria the project girl, said putting her in a place would teach everyone a lesson. The room shifted. The JAG officer looked at the MPs. "Get her phone records and her laptop." The order carried weight like a judge's gavel. Across the school, news of the confession rippled like electricity through water. Teachers whispered in stunned huddles. Students leaned out of classrooms, faces pale, phones lighting up with each new rumor. Some were angry, others nauseated, and a few dared to hope justice might actually exist. Within the hour, the tech team moved like surgeons through the wreckage, the unearthed digital footprints, emails, logs, payment transfers, and worst of all, the videos. Pixelated but damning, each clip drove another nail into Ashford's legacy. The laughing boys, the screams, the tears. But the worst, the one that made even the most hardened soldier flinch, was her voice, clear, unrepentant, delighted. "That's the spirit," she cooed over one recording. "Let her remember who runs this place." General Darius Washington didn't hesitate. Alongside acting principal Mariah Foster, he made the call. "Play then, every one." And so it began. A crackle over the intercom system stopped every classroom mid-sentence. Then came Ashford's voice, sickly sweet, cheerful as poison. "Oh, that's perfect. Look at her cry. That's what happens to liars." Her laughter followed, long, cruel, triumphant. The sound flooded the school like gas into a closed room. Gasps, silence, then sobs. In the teacher's lounge, one woman collapsed into a chair, weeping. "My God, we let this happen. We all let this happen." Students turned away from their screens, unable to meet each other's eyes. Some cried, some stared at the floor, others whispered one thing again and again. She liked it. She liked hurting her. And when the final clip ended, the PA hissed static and went silent. But silence no longer protected the guilty. The cruelty could no longer be denied. It was broadcast, eternal, truth carved in audio. The foundations of St. Jude didn't crack, they shattered. Bootsteps thundered. Down the main hallway came the local sheriff, now cleared by the MPs and burning with purpose. 2 deputies flanked him, cuffs in hand, cold steel, no ceremony, no delay. The crowd parted as he passed, faces stunned into stillness. Teachers lowered their eyes. Students backed away, watching the long walk of justice unfold in real time. The double doors to Ashford's inner sanctum slammed open with the final echo, loud enough to shake the bones of everyone who had hidden behind her smile. The reckoning wasn't coming. It had arrived.
At the edge of the crowd, Gavin Rhodes closed his folder with a sharp snap and gave a silent nod to General Darius Washington, a quiet salute between warriors who knew that justice, when real, is never clean, only necessary. As Lorraine Ashford was driven off in the back of a police cruiser, stripped of her last illusion of control, the camera swiveled to Aria and her father. No longer victims of a corrupt system, they had become the iron spine of St. Jude's reckoning. Their story was now etched into the school's legacy, not with forged degrees, but with blood, courage, and the kind of truth that leaves scars. Yet beneath the victory chants and breaking headlines, a second reckoning brewed, quieter, meaner, and far more personal. Inside the boardroom of St. Jude, where corruption had once worn designer suits and smiled through handshakes, the air reeked of panic. The room, once a gallery of polished performance, now felt like a bunker on the verge of collapse. The interim board chair sat at the head of the table, face gaunt from sleepless nights, while the others fidgeted in discomfort, guilt bleeding through their $4,000 suits and pearl chokers. Some glanced at the door, half hoping Ashford would burst in and restore the hierarchy, but the new hierarchy had already arrived, and it wore a decorated general's uniform. Darius Washington stepped into the room not as a savior, but as a man prepared to deliver judgment. His presence was electric, calm but suffocating. He looked around, eyes hard and deliberate. No one was spared. "We are not here to salvage St. Jude's reputation," he began, voice level. "We are here to salvage its soul." A rustle of protest rose. A woman near the end of the table dared to speak. "General Washington, with all due respect, this school is under siege in the press. We must project stability."
His gaze pinned her to the seat. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Stability built on silence is nothing but a well-dressed lie, and every lie you told to protect this institution made it more fragile. He laid a folder on the table and began to read names aloud, one after another, trustees, faculty, senior administrators. Every one of them had fingerprints on the machinery of Ashford's cruelty, bribes accepted, complaints buried, innocent students punished to protect power. For every stone in Ashford's empire, Darius had a ledger of accomplices. You let her brutalize children because she brought prestige. You signed your names to her violence because it kept you comfortable, but comfort is no longer your currency. One aging trustee barked out, "You can't threaten us." Washington's tone turned glacial. "This isn't a threat. It's a federal investigation." He gestured to the school's legal counsel, who nodded grimly. St. Jude took federal grants under the condition of fairness and non-discrimination. That makes every violation a criminal offense. The temperature in the room dropped. Phones vibrated. One board member's foundation had frozen funding. Another quietly slid her tablet off the table as news broke that alumni donors were pulling out. Doors that had once opened at a whisper were now slamming shut. Washington didn't stop. You can't buy your way out with endowments or connections. The only way back is through fire, accountability, and reform. His eyes shifted to the teachers clustered at the rear. Some had been Ashford's cheerleaders, others had turned away when students cried for help. If your name appears in the investigation, you're suspended, effective immediately. The age of silence is over. A young teacher broke into quiet tears, one of the few who had tried to speak up, only to be crushed. Now she wept from the relief of not being alone anymore. Across the room, others kept their eyes fixed on the table, unable to meet the truth. Then came the final purge. A maintenance crew entered carrying drills and a trash bin. Without ceremony, they unscrewed the gold-plated nameplate from the principal's office. It read, "Dr. Lorraine Ashford." Moments later, they tossed it into the bin, the same way she had once discarded Aria's father's military medal. The third echoed through the hallway like a final gunshot at a dictator's fall. Around campus, the news spread like wildfire. Teachers whispered, students stared in disbelief. A generation raised to believe the system was immovable now saw it crumble in real time. But General Washington knew this wasn't victory yet. From a window, he watched the crowd gather outside, new energy, raw and righteous, rising from the ruins. Then came a soft knock. A woman stepped in. She wore no pearls or power suit. Her dress was plain, her shoes worn. Her eyes were tired but unflinching. She looked out of place until she opened her mouth. "General Washington," she said, voice trembling but steady beneath. He nodded. "How can I help you?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope. "I have something no one's asked for. Not yet." He gestured for her to sit. The air stilled. Whatever this was, it carried weight. She lowered herself into the chair, hands shaking, but her eyes unwavering. She said, "My name is Naomi Fields. I've worked here 25 years. Most of them never even learned my name." Her lips curled into a bittersweet smile. "Except your daughter. She always said thank you, always looked me in the eye." General Washington listened, unmoving. Outside, the crowd held its breath. But in that small, quiet room, far from cameras and headlines, the next crack in the foundation had just begun. And this time, it was the quietest woman in the school who would make the loudest sound.
At the edge of the crowd, Kevin Rhodes closed his folder with a sharp snap and gave a silent nod to Colonel Darius Washington, a quiet salute between warriors who knew that justice, when real, is never clean, only necessary. As Lorraine Ashford was driven off in the back of a police cruiser, stripped of her last illusion of control, the cameras swiveled to Aria and her father. No longer victims of a corrupt system, they had become the iron spine of St. Jude's reckoning. Their story was now etched into the school's legacy, not with forged degrees, but with blood, courage, and the kind of truth that leaves scars. Yet beneath the victory chants and breaking headlines, a second reckoning brewed, quieter, meaner, and far more personal. Inside the boardroom of St. Jude, where corruption had once worn designer suits and smiled through handshakes, the air reeked of panic. The room, once a gallery of performance polish, now felt like a bunker on the verge of collapse. The interim board chair sat at the head of the table, face gaunt from sleepless nights, while others fidgeted in discomfort, guilt bleeding through their $4,000 suits and pearl chokers. Some glanced at the door, half hoping Ashford would burst in and restore the hierarchy. But the new hierarchy had already arrived, and it wore a decorated colonel's uniform. Darius Washington stepped into the room not as a savior, but as a man prepared to deliver judgment. His presence was electric, calm but suffocating. He looked around, eyes hard and deliberate. No one was spared. "We are not here to salvage St. Jude's reputation," he began, voice level. "We are here to salvage its soul." A rustle of protest rose. A woman near the end of the table dared to speak. "Colonel Washington, with all due respect, this school is under siege in the press. We must project stability." His gaze pinned her to the seat. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Stability built on silence is nothing but a well-dressed lie, and every lie you told to protect this institution made it more fragile. He laid a folder on the table and began to read names aloud, one after another. Trustees, faculty, senior administrators, every one of them had fingerprints on the machinery of Ashford's cruelty. Bribes accepted, complaints buried, innocent students punished to protect power. For every stone in Ashford's empire, Darius had a ledger of accomplices. You let her brutalize children because she brought prestige. You signed your names to her violence because it kept you comfortable. But comfort is no longer your currency. One aging trustee barked out, "You can't threaten us." Washington's tone turned glacial. "This isn't a threat. It's a federal investigation." He gestured to the school's legal counsel, who nodded grimly. St. Jude took federal grants under the condition of fairness and non-discrimination. That makes every violation a criminal offense. The temperature in the room dropped. Phones vibrated. One board member's foundation had frozen funding. Another quietly slid her tablet off the table as news broke that alumni donors were pulling out. Doors that had once opened at a whisper now were slamming shut. Washington didn't stop. You can't buy your way out with endowments or connections. The only way back is through fire, accountability, and reform. His eyes shifted to the teachers clustered at the rear. Some had been Ashford's cheerleaders. Others had turned away when students cried for help. If your name appears in the investigation, you're suspended, effective immediately. The age of silence is over. A young teacher broke into quiet tears, one of the few who had tried to speak up only to be crushed. Now she wept from the relief of not being alone anymore. Across the room, others kept their eyes fixed on the table, unable to meet the truth. Then came the final purge. A maintenance crew entered carrying drills and a trash bin. Without ceremony, they unscrewed the gold-plated nameplate from the principal's office. It read, "Dr. Lorraine Ashford." Moments later, they tossed it into the bin, the same way she had once discarded Aria's father's military medal. The thud echoed through the hallway like a final gunshot at a dictator's fall. Around campus, the news spread like wildfire. Teachers whispered. Students stared in disbelief. A generation raised to believe the system was immovable now saw it crumble in real time. But Colonel Washington knew this wasn't victory yet. From a window, he watched the crowd gather outside, new energy, raw and righteous, rising from the ruins. Then came a soft knock. A woman stepped in. She wore no pearls or power suit. Her dress was plain, her shoes worn. Her eyes were tired, but unflinching. She looked out of place until she opened her mouth. "Colonel Washington," she said, voice trembling but steady beneath. He nodded. How can I help you? She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick envelope. I have something no one's asked for. Not yet. He gestured for her to sit. The air stilled. Whatever this was, it carried weight. She lowered herself into the chair, hands shaking, but her eyes unwavering. My name is Naomi Fields. I've worked here 25 years. Most of them never even learned my name. Her lips curled into a bittersweet smile. Except your daughter. She always said thank you. Always looked me in the eye. Colonel Washington listened, unmoving. Outside, the crowd held its breath. But in that small, quiet room, far from cameras and headlines, the next crack in the foundation had just begun, and this time it was the quietest woman in the school who would make the loudest sound.
You said you had something for me. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Miss Naomi Fields reached into her worn purse and pulled out a weathered notebook. Its blue cover faded almost to gray, corners curled like they'd survived 100 storms. She laid it on the table like it was a holy object. "This is my diary," she said. "I started it the day my grandson died, the day Elijah took his own life." General Darius Washington's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He waited. She pressed forward, her hands trembling, not from weakness, but from release. 5 years ago, Elijah was a sophomore here, smart, quiet, wanted to build bridges, literally. He was going to be an engineer. Her voice cracked. But Dr. Lorraine Ashford destroyed him, humiliated him in front of his class, called him a thug, accused him of cheating, laughed at his clothes, punished him for things he never did. She paused, took a breath that sounded like it scraped through years of grief. Then she accused him of stealing a laptop. No evidence, but she called the cops. They put his name in the paper like he was already guilty. Naomi's hands tightened, knuckles pale. That winter, he hung himself in his closet. My daughter never forgave herself. Silence pressed against the walls. General Washington didn't move. He didn't interrupt. Naomi swallowed hard. "I stayed," she whispered. "I scrubbed her floors, emptied her trash, watched her crush student after student, because I needed to know. I needed someone to see it, to believe me." She pushed the notebook forward. "Every day I wrote down what I saw, what I heard, every threat, every envelope, every teacher who looked away, names, dates, voices." Her fingers flipped to a page, pausing to trace the lines. December 12th, 2 years ago, Ashford cornered a scholarship girl behind the gym, told her she'd lose her grant if her parents didn't show up to the next fundraiser. She turned another page. March 4th, she made a janitor take off his shoes and shine hers in front of the senior boys. They laughed. She laughed louder. Her voice was shaking now, but she kept going. Every page bled with the kind of truth people try to bury. The diary was a graveyard of stolen futures, each line a coffin nailed shut by cruelty and power. Students used, staff manipulated, families broken, and yet here it was, proof no one could deny. "I thought," Naomi said, her tears slipping quietly down her cheeks, "that someone might finally care, someone might stop her." Washington reached out and placed his hand gently over hers. "I care, Miss Fields, and I swear to you it stops now." She nodded, eyes closed, as if she'd waited years just to hear those words. "I don't want pity. I want justice for Elijah and for every child who didn't make it out." The moment the diary was opened, the tide shifted. General Washington contacted the district attorney that afternoon. Naomi Fields was summoned before the grand jury and again at the disciplinary hearing. Her notebook wasn't just evidence, it was a detonator. The board's attorneys tried to counter, but the depth, the dates, the specificity, they couldn't escape it.
Teachers wept when her words echoed through the courtroom. Some parents broke down, realizing their own children had hinted at these horrors and been dismissed. On the stand, Naomi's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Every syllable struck like a bell tolling for the damned. She read from her diary with a calm that shamed everyone who had ever stayed silent. She named teachers who enabled abuse, described scholarships ripped away unless favors were given. She recounted moments Ashford had nearly broken her, too. When the judge asked why she hadn't quit, her answer silenced the room. "Because if I left, no one would ever know, and the next Elijah would die alone." No one shifted, no one blinked. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. What she had said couldn't be turned into a headline. It was too human for that. In the front row, Aria's hand gripped her father. General Washington leaned over and whispered, "You see now, sweetheart, the smallest voice, if it keeps speaking, is the one that brings the walls down." When the judge finally spoke, his voice was hoarse with gravity. "What happened here was not just the failure of one woman, but the collapse of a community that chose comfort over conscience. Today, we begin to reverse that." Naomi's diary was entered into evidence. General Washington stood, tears in his eyes, and thanked her, not as an officer, but as a father, and as a man who'd spent his life fighting for people who were never meant to fight alone. Outside, for the first time in years, the storm had passed. The sky cleared above St. Jude, where at once stood a statue honoring Ashford. Now there was nothing, only sunlight. Students gathered. Some cried, some just stood silent, as if the weight to dissolve. But one thing was undeniable. For the first time in their lives, St. Jude felt honest and safe, and maybe salvageable. But as the wind shifted, one thing remained clear. This wasn't the end, because just beneath the surface, something even deeper was waiting to rise.
The courtroom pulsed with an energy rarely felt in places built for bureaucracy. No longer just a hall of justice, it had become a reckoning chamber. This wasn't just a verdict for those who led the abuse, it was for the cowards who watched, enabled, defended, and stayed quiet. Every seat in the Juvenile Justice Center was taken. Reporters murmured in corners. Teachers, students, and parents who once trembled under the shadow of St. Jude now bore witness to its dismantling. At the heart of it sat the dethroned tyrants, Landon Hale, Bryce Mercer, and Reed Holloway. Stripped of their designer swagger, they looked like scared boys in borrowed suits, dwarfed by the weight of the truth. Judge Clarissa Monroe called the room to order, her gavel ringing out like a shot in the dark. Her reputation was legend, mercy for the vulnerable, steel for the arrogant. The charges rolled off her tongue like a litany of shame. Harassment, assault, conspiracy to intimidate, digital privacy violations. The evidence was airtight. Texts, videos, eyewitnesses. The question wasn't guilt, it was how deeply the sentence would carve into the legacy they once weaponized. Their parents begged, donated to charities, promised future reforms, but the courtroom wasn't for sale, not today. General Darius Washington took the stand, a storm of presence in uniform. His voice carried the weight of decades spent defending others. "My daughter wasn't the first," he said, his gaze sweeping the room. "She may not be the last, but today, this court has a chance to prove that justice doesn't check bank accounts before it acts. I ask for consequences, not just for Aria, but for every kid who was laughed at, cornered, or erased." When sentencing came, the courtroom held its breath. Judge Monroe didn't flinch. "Because you are minors, I cannot imprison you," she began, "but I will not insult justice by treating your crimes as childish mistakes. You will serve 6 months of mandatory community service at the Veterans Rehabilitation Home. You will wash the feet of sacrifice.
You will learn humility in the shadow of real courage." The boys blinked, stunned. No bars, no cells, but something worse. No hiding. A week later, Landon Hale stood outside the VA facility, clutching a lunch tray, hands shaking. The sterile scent of bleach and broken bodies filled his nose. His first assignment? Feeding Mr. Malaloy, a double amputee from Vietnam with a sharp tongue and sharper eyes. "So you're the prince they sent to feed me, huh?" the old man said, smirking. "Try not to drop the spoon, sweetheart. I've lost enough." The days dragged. Oatmeal, bedpans, laundry soaked in regret. But Mr. Malaloy wasn't cruel, just honest. Between bites, he painted pictures of jungles and brothers who never made it home. "What landed you here?" he asked one day, eyes piercing through Landon's silence. "I thought I was better," Landon finally said, shame dripping from every syllable, "because people told me I was." Malaloy didn't scold. They always do, until pain teaches different. By week 3, as they worked on a jigsaw puzzle, Malaloy dropped a truth that pierced like shrapnel. "My best friend in the war was black, saved me twice, didn't care about my color, only whether I had his back. I'd have died for that man." Landon looked away, eyes burning. The laughter, the slurs, the cruelty he once served cold now echoed as wounds. The tears came without warning. "I'm sorry, I really am." As the months passed, the transformation deepened. Landon no longer swaggered. He moved with quiet purpose. He served meals, folded laundry, and played cards with men who barely spoke. His pride decayed. His soul breathed. Bryce and Reed walked the same path. Their silence replaced arrogance. Their eyes lost the shine of entitlement. 6 months later, the boys returned to Judge Monroe. They walked in different, quieter, weathered. The courtroom sensed it. The judge studied them. "Justice is not destruction, it is awakening. You hurt people, you broke trust, you shamed yourselves. If you forget, you will return here. If you remember, you may rise." Landon turned. His eyes found Aria, General Washington, his own parents. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I will spend my life trying to earn it." There was no applause, no hug, but the air shifted. Real change doesn't scream. It grows, quiet, relentless. Outside, the sky had cleared, but one shadow still lingered, waiting for its final reckoning. In the visitation wing of the county detention center, silence ruled. Fluorescent lights buzzed above scuffed floors. The air reeked of bleach and resignation. Thick glass separated inmate from visitor like fate sealing off the past. On one side sat Dr. Lorraine Ashford, no longer in designer coats, just in orange jumpsuit and the pale skin of someone who'd been stripped of illusion. Her hands clenched, knuckles bone white. Alone now, powerless, waiting for a truth she couldn't control. And for the first time in her reign of fear, no one was coming to rescue her.
Years of domination had peeled away like rotting paint. The woman who once ruled every hallway at St. Jude now looked like a ghost in orange. No makeup, hollow cheeks, wiry gray streaks in her tangled hair. Her spine hunched, her fingernails bitten. And those once piercing eyes, the ones that had terrified students and staff alike, were ringed with sleepless red and humiliation. There were no followers left, no sycophants, no school board allies. Just silence, fluorescent flicker, and antiseptic stench. Across the glass, General Darius Washington sat immovable. He hadn't come to gloat. He'd come because she asked him to. One line, barely legible, written in shaky desperation. "I need to understand why." He picked up the receiver. So did she, her fingers twitching. For a long second, they said nothing. Dr. Lorraine Ashford tried to summon the trademark glare, but the fire was gone. What remained wasn't a villain, just a woman undone.
a child grasping for an explanation. "Why are you here, Darius?" Her voice scraped the air. "If you came to savor this, do it quickly. It won't fix anything." He answered quietly, "I didn't come to savor, Lorraine. I came because you begged for truth." She exhaled, the sound cracking in the plastic handset. "You always win. No matter what I built, how hard I worked, how sharp I was, it was never enough. You always came out right." She leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Tell me, what makes you so damn strong?" Darius didn't flinch. "It's not strength, and it's never luck." His voice softened, but his posture stayed straight. "It's love, Lorraine. My life was never about power. It was about purpose, serving something bigger than myself, my daughter, my country, my people. That's what anchors you through hell." She scoffed, but her breath caught. "Don't start with the hero nonsense. You think you're better because you wore a uniform. I had 3 doctorates. I built one of the most elite schools in the state. I was on panels, in magazines, respected, feared." "You were feared," he agreed, his voice like tempered steel, "but never loved. You chased obedience, not respect, surrounded yourself with flatterers, silenced dissent. You didn't lead, Lorraine, you manipulated, and when the mirror cracked, you crumbled." Her face twitched. Anger surged for a half heartbeat, then died. "They clapped for me once. Students cheered at pep rallies. Parents emailed praise. I mattered." Darius shook his head. "They loved the mask, not the woman underneath. And the second that mask fell, there was nothing left to hold on to. You were alone, even in a crowd." Her shoulders collapsed in defeat. "All my life I was told that if I outworked, outsmarted, outlasted everyone, I'd win." Her voice fractured. "And I did. I clawed my way to the top. And now look at me." Darius didn't gloat. His next words carried the weight of a father who had seen war and still believed in grace. "You thought winning meant crushing everyone below you. But strength isn't what you take, it's what you give. It's who you stand for when it's hard. My daughter knew that. So did every student you called weak." A tear rolled down her cheek, unexpected. "You don't understand. I was nothing. I had to prove I wasn't disposable, that I could matter more than what people assumed." He nodded slowly. "You could have mattered, Lorraine. You had the mind, the position, the opportunity. But instead of building lives, you built an empire of fear. And when it collapsed, so did you." "I have no one, no job, no name worth remembering. Just headlines, and not the kind I wanted." His gaze didn't waver. "Legacy isn't about magazine covers. It's about what you leave behind in people's hearts. Love or fear, healing or scars. That's what echoes." She dropped her eyes. "So what now? What do I do in here with nothing?" He stood, gently placing the phone down. "You sit with the truth. You learn from it. And if you're lucky, you begin again. Most people don't get that chance." He turned to leave, but her hand slammed gently against the glass. "Darius!" Her voice cracked. "How do you live with what you've done?" He paused, not looking back at first. "By making it right when I can," he said, turning his head slightly. "By facing what I can't fix, and by loving something greater than myself." She watched him disappear into the light. Alone now, truly. The buzz of the prison lights couldn't drown out the silence in her chest. The applause that once fed her ego was gone. All that remained was the cold echo of her own breath and the sobs that finally broke through. She folded in on herself. Not a villain, not a visionary, just a woman who had lost the one war that mattered, the war for her soul.
Outside, General Darius Washington emerged into a crisp wind. Justice had been served, but healing was still in motion. For his daughter Arya, for the students, for the future of St. Jude. Behind him, the old era, one of cruelty dressed as order, began to fade. Ahead, a new chapter waited. The auditorium of St. Jude never held such gravity. This wasn't a graduation, this was a rebirth. Gone were the banners celebrating legacy donors and sports dynasties. In their place, words like courage, truth, and belonging hung from the rafters. Every seat filled, students, faculty, parents, even those who had left the school in anger years ago, returned for this. The ghosts hadn't vanished, but they no longer ruled the room. And in that space, charged with memory and hope, a new future began to breathe.
When Arya Washington's name echoed through the speakers, the entire stadium rose like a wave. General Darius Washington exhaled slowly, eyes locked on his daughter as she stepped forward, her graduation gown catching the light, the Medal of Valor still gleaming over her chest like a battle scar turned badge. She didn't walk like a student. She walked like a survivor. At the podium, Arya stood silent for a beat, commanding the room not with force, but with presence. The applause quieted into reverent stillness. Her gaze scanned the crowd, classmates who once whispered or watched, teachers who had doubted or defended, friends who had wept with her, her father seated just beyond the edge of shadow and spotlight. In her silence, memories surged. Years of being dismissed, mocked, questioned, the sting of betrayal from authority, the bruises no one saw, the dignity she refused to surrender. Her voice, when it came, was calm, yet it cut through the still air like truth laid bare. When I first walked into St. Jude, I thought being strong meant pretending, smiling through every slap, swallowing every insult, and telling myself that silence was survival. But I learned something far more powerful. Real strength isn't quiet suffering. It's speaking the truth even when your voice shakes, especially when it's not safe. She didn't flinch. Strength is lifting others when the world tells you to stay in line. It's choosing grace over revenge. It's standing up when sitting down would be easier. She paused, letting the weight settle. I'm standing here today because people believed I mattered. My father, my friends, my teachers who chose courage instead of comfort. They didn't rescue me. They stood beside me while I found my voice. And because of them, I learned what honor really means. The audience leaned in, not for drama, not for spectacle, but for something deeper, truth unfiltered by politics or performance. General Washington blinked back emotion. Regret and pride tangled in his chest. He couldn't stop the pain his daughter had endured, but he had watched her rise from it like forged steel. Arya's words turned to gratitude. She honored her late mother's dreams, her father's sacrifices, and every voice that rose for those who couldn't. I don't want revenge, she said, her tone steady, almost sacred. I want remembrance. Remembrance of every moment we failed each other, and the courage to be better. I dream of a day no child is told their voice doesn't matter. That dream wasn't hers alone. It was her mother's. It was written in every act of defiance, every name spoken in solidarity. When the final diploma was called and the brass band struck the opening chords of America the Beautiful, the graduates stood. Arya looked out across the sea of faces, her eyes locking on her father's. Her grip tightened around her diploma, and then, without a word, she stepped forward, lifted her arm, and delivered a salute. Crisp, flawless, the one he had taught her in their backyard years ago. It wasn't a salute of military obedience. It was a declaration of legacy, of defiance, of love. General Washington stood instantly, not as a commanding officer, but but as a father who had seen his daughter endure battles more brutal than any war. He returned the salute, eyes glassy, spine rigid, and in that frozen moment, everything else, cheers, music, the world itself, fell away. Father and daughter, soldier and survivor, meeting in a silent exchange that spoke louder than any speech. It was a language of pain, endurance, and an unbreakable bond. Then Arya lowered her hand, ran to him, and collapsed into his arms. They held each other with the kind of embrace that rewrote history. The crowd wept openly. Some cheered, others just stood still, stunned by the gravity of what they'd witnessed. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was a reckoning for every child who had ever been told they were too loud, too weak, too different. And as Arya stepped back to the mic one last time, the sun blazed overhead, casting her in gold. Honor, she said, her voice strong and unyielding, is not about medals or plaques. It's not about how many people salute you. It's about how you rise when the world tries to make you kneel. Justice may be late, but it never forgets where it belongs. Applause roared. Veterans in the crowd saluted back. Some had tears streaming down their faces. Others clenched their fists, not in anger, but in solidarity. Something had shifted. A new promise had been made. As the crowd dispersed, Arya and her father stood together, arms wrapped around each other. Their shadows stretched across the lawn, two figures fused into one. The camera pulled back, revealing the school now bathed in new light. Gone were the portraits of legacy donors. In their place, banners that read truth, courage, rebirth. The very walls seemed to breathe again. And so, Arya's journey at St. Jude didn't end with applause. It ended with transformation. What began as a story of erasure became a movement of defiance. What began with whispers ended in a voice that echoed. Because true honor isn't about survival. It's about standing tall for those still on the ground. And in a world too quick to forget, Arya's voice reminded us, justice, though bloodied and delayed, never surrenders. General Washington's love, Arya's fire, and the quiet courage of every ally along the way built more than a legacy. They carved a path for others to follow. One voice became a roar. One stand became a movement. One girl's pain became a revolution. And now we ask you, when have you witnessed someone stand tall when the world wanted them small? Share your story in the comments. If Arya's truth moved you, hit like, share with someone who needs it, and subscribe to our channel, because we don't just tell stories, we amplify the voices that were never meant to be silenced.